Broadcasting from Detroit's Cass Corridor, it's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Today on the show, mayoral candidate Todd Perkins discusses his vision for a community-first Detroit and why this moment demands empathy-driven leadership.
Plus, we finally get the answer to a lingering question. Did the big three auto companies conspire to prevent public transit from succeeding in Detroit?
Also, investigators are looking at evidence from the Air India plane crash that killed over 200 people.
And it has some of us wondering and worried yet again about flying.
We'll talk about airline safety with a former pilot and aviation historian.
But first,
we are here in the United States to come together. Our diversity is what makes the United States the United States.
We're coming off a powerful weekend of action. Millions of people in hundreds of cities were united in No Kings protests that swept the country. Americans were out to condemn what many see as President Trump's federal overreach, his aggressive anti-immigrant enforcement, and a military parade that celebrated him and the U.S. Army. In Los Angeles, protesters have been out for days, and Trump responded with a page from the authoritarian playbook. He deployed thousands of National Guard troops and hundreds of active duty Marines onto the streets of L.A. On Friday, for the first time in recent history, military personnel temporarily detained a civilian. Here in Detroit, thousands raised their voices at Clark Park, shouting, "Down with deportations." Local advocates say ICE agents recently arrested a Venezuelan family in southwest Detroit, moments after their asylum hearing was dismissed. At the McNamara Federal Courthouse, asylum seekers were detained just as judges ended their proceedings. That tactic, attend your immigration hearing and risk arrest, is becoming common. An almost graduated Detroit high school student was also detained during a traffic stop on his way to a school field trip. He was deported last week, despite many calls from the community urging officials to let him temporarily stay. To help us think about this moment, we're joined by attorney and professor Sabrina Balgamwala. She's the director of the Asylum and Immigration Law Clinic at Wayne State University. Professor, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
So first, I want to assess the climate with you. This weekend, as I mentioned, Michiganders joined nationwide No Kings protests against federal immigration enforcement, among other Trump policies. And in L.A., things escalated with Trump's deployment of Marines and National Guard troops. And again, as I mentioned, Reuters reported that U.S. Marines carried out the first known detention of a civilian on Friday. How unprecedented is this moment historically and legally?
Well, in terms of what we saw at the protests, I would say highly unprecedented. What we saw in L.A. with the deployment of the military and pushing back against people who are exercising their First Amendment rights, that's highly unprecedented.
Okay, so this moment to you feels striking, but I do want to try and do a little bit more comparing and contrasting, because you started directing the Asylum and Immigration Law Clinic at Wayne State during Trump's first administration. You stayed through President Biden, and now we're in Trump's second term. So can you talk about these eras? I mean, I'm wondering how has immigration policy and its enforcement changed or stayed the same through these political swings?
Sure. So I think the first Trump administration, we saw a lot of sort of breaking down the system. There was a huge number of people who left U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, people who left the immigration judge bench. And in the absence of staff, we saw huge delays for people. So the folks weren't able to secure their status. Hearings were postponed. And so we sort of saw those systems starting to break down a little bit. And then under the Biden administration, unfortunately, these systems were still broken. And at the same time, they were overwhelmed because of the huge number of people who were placed in proceedings during the first Trump administration. Typically, there's a little bit more give and take, a little more exercise of discretion because simply there's a limit on how many people can be deported. It's expensive, it's time consuming. And so the systems were really overwhelmed by a huge number of people in, having their claims pending. And they were not able to resolve them. And now we're back under a Trump administration. And we are dealing with the same problems, except now the Trump administration is going outside these systems entirely to remove people by putting them in expedited removal proceedings so they don't have the opportunity to have their case heard in court, put huge delays on applications pending with USCIS, and even people having their humanitarian statuses taken away.
So what I'm hearing from you, Professor, is that there are huge cascading effects when it comes to our immigration system. And just because you have one president, let's say, enacting certain policies, we're going to be feeling the effects from the preceding president and the policies that they enacted well into that other president's term. At the same time, though, we know that both Democrats and Republicans have been quick to deport people and to facilitate these types of aggressive measures. However, in this moment, it does seem like what we're seeing is more aggressive. I want to talk to you about that. I want to zoom in on Detroit because we've seen some scenarios unfold lately. Families arrested moments after asylum hearings, particularly at the McNamara Federal Courthouse. Does this feel like the measures are more aggressive? And then I also want to talk about, how this complicates an already complicated process.
Absolutely. A complicated process indeed. I think this is part of how due process has been defined in the immigration context. It looks very different than it does in the criminal context. People are not guaranteed the right to an attorney, so many people are unrepresented. There are many aspects of the process that are intended to make it easier, to remove people. It's just a much more frictionless process. So what we're seeing with the arrests that are happening outside the federal building in immigration courts across the country, ICE attorneys are making motions for people who've been in the country for less than 2 years. They're making oral motions in court with no opportunity for people to contest them, no opportunity to appeal, and no opportunity to get additional time to find counsel. Oral motions terminating people's proceedings so that they can be put in expedited removal. In expedited removal, there is no immigration court proceeding. The person can be deported immediately. And so that's why we're seeing people arrested outside of the immigration court.
Okay, and so then the second part to this is that the asylum process is already very complex. So what do these tactics mean for the asylum process and for people seeking asylum?
Navigating the asylum process is already so difficult, and particularly for people who aren't represented. And I'm finding now that even when when you are representing somebody, the standard for the asylum application, what has to be filed, often on a very short timeline, is the bar is much higher. The need for corroboration is much more extensive. And the law is complex. It's not necessarily straightforward. A lot of things that people are fleeing, they have to be contextualized in certain ways in order for people to qualify. And that's not apparent when you're looking at the application itself. It's not apparent when people, say they want to represent themselves. And so, it's a complex process that unfortunately a lot of people are having to navigate alone.
And so you're saying also, though, that you're seeing due process being bypassed. Is that right?
Well, yeah. Like I said, due process looks very different already. It feels sort of bare bones compared to when we think about what constitutional due process looks like for people in criminal proceedings. It's already, The fact that someone has the opportunity, to fight for relief, but maybe not with the assistance of counsel, maybe doing so on a very short timeline. Doing so while detained, I mean, that's another dimension that's really coming into focus. Not only detained, but maybe sent over 1,000 miles away from friends and family and the support network, people who could help provide counsel or gather evidence that's necessary to win the claim. You can see that things are really stacked against people, even where we have due process.
And these are folks who are applying for asylum under great duress. They're fleeing very serious situations, oftentimes where their lives are in danger in other countries. And you've been guiding students at Wayne State's Immigration Law Clinic through these challenges. Could you share a story that's stuck with you, something illustrating what people are facing under these intense enforcement actions?
Absolutely. I've already mentioned the challenges that come with somebody being detained. At the beginning of the semester, we had nobody in immigration detention. And at the end of the semester, we had 2 people who were facing removal proceedings in ICE custody. And the amount of work it takes to stay in communication with somebody to prepare the case on a quickly moving timeline, it kicked everything into high gear, and it stretched our resources, as a program, and it worries me because the more prevalent detention becomes. I mean, these were folks who were on parole; they were, living in the community, and were taken into custody during an ICE check-in, and
so no criminal actions.
No criminal history at all. Simply just, seeking asylum under the wrong conditions. So they have to fight the rest of their case while they're detained.
We're talking about aggressive immigration enforcement in Metro Detroit and beyond. Our guest is Sabrina Balgamwala. She's an immigration attorney and the director of the Asylum and Immigration Law Clinic at Wayne State University. Professor, I'm guessing the mood at your clinic is a bit charged right now, given the rising demand for your services. I'm wondering how your students have been handling these increased caseloads and also the emotional weight that comes with advocating for people who are navigating a precarious system.
Absolutely. Certainly the things that we witness as advocates really weigh heavy on our hearts and in our minds. Like, I think immigration practice is, I was saying, a lifestyle. We never stop worrying about our clients, and we feel their precarity. And students feel that. I think they also feel a tremendous amount of pressure. I really, really take my hat off to them. My students I had this semester really just gripped the reins and hung on and had to talk to clients about all kinds of uncertain situations where we weren't sure. Trying to advise somebody on how to proceed is really difficult. People wanted to know about work, about travel, about what they should do if they're pulled over by law enforcement, the ID that they're supposed to be carrying. And so it's hard to talk to people in a way where, as lawyers, we're always imagining the worst case scenario. That's kind of our job, is to imagine what that might look like and try to safeguard against it. So the balance between staying vigilant, but also not panicking our clients at a moment where we really can't afford to let our stress levels go off the charts. This is going to be a long fight. Learning to walk that line was really challenging. My students did an amazing job. They're all so committed, and that's part of what's kept me going.
I imagine, too, for attorneys, you want to be clear, and the level of ambiguity right now in immigration policy and the way that has been weaponized. I mean, some of the things you're talking about right now, that also has to be extremely difficult both for you and for your clients when you can't give them a lot of clarity on things. I mean, are you finding that? I remember speaking with an immigration attorney during the first Trump administration, and she told me that there were rules changes happening so often that it was dizzying to just practice immigration law in general. Is that also something that you're contending with?
Oh, absolutely. It's like watching a tennis match. There's a policy that changes. Someone goes to court. There's a temporary restraining order. The law is temporarily halted, but maybe only for some people. And it's really challenging to keep up. One of the things that really drew me to immigration practice is the community. I mean, all of us are we consider ourselves working together on one side. And this is a time when I am so grateful for the community because there are so many smart people who are figuring things out, sharing information, drafting practice advisories, walking people through scenarios that most of us haven't seen before. And so we've really seen the community band together to support each other.
Let's talk about one part of the community, actually. I'm thinking about activists who recently urged Detroit City Council to formally declare itself a sanctuary city or refuse cooperation with federal enforcement. But Council member Gabriela Santiago Romero said that could potentially expose vulnerable people without actually changing federal actions. So she was trying to put the brakes on that. I'm wondering how meaningful are symbolic resolutions like sanctuary declarations when federal ICE operations continue unchecked?
Yeah, this is part of I'm a bit ambivalent about this term sanctuary city because it's used a lot and I don't think that people usually know what it means. Detroit considers itself a welcoming city because law enforcement still does collaborate with ICE, but that's true for many sanctuary cities as well. Perhaps that involvement is limited, but when people are taken into criminal custody, there's usually some provision that allows for them to be transferred to ICE custody and face removal. That's just the way the law is. And so when places hold themselves out as sanctuary cities, that can, on one hand, be very meaningful. There can be very meaningful ways that law enforcement involvement is limited, but it's not necessarily clear from that, nomenclature alone. And, we've seen that cities that have, proudly declared themselves sanctuary cities now find themselves in the crosshairs. And we can definitely see in Detroit, I think there's been an effort to kind of play cards close to the chest, again, considering ourselves a welcoming city, but not going so far as to declare ourselves a sanctuary city to avoid retribution.
So it sounds like it's really difficult right now for community leaders, city leaders, advocates to strike that balance. In a place that has like local pro-immigrant values, striking that balance against aggressive federal mandates.
Yeah, I think it's just a really hard time for people to take a principled stand because there's been a tendency for the executive to punish them.
Now, some immigration hardliners argue that if people don't follow proper channels, whether applying for, let's say, asylum at official ports of entry or securing legal visas, then they shouldn't be allowed to stay in the U.S. From your perch as an immigration attorney, how do you respond to the claim that immigrants facing detention or deportation brought these difficulties on themselves by not doing it the right way?
I mean, my first response is that so many of these people are seeking asylum, which is an internationally recognized form of relief. And the system is making it harder and harder for people to present their claims for fair consideration, which is something that is absolutely required legally for the United States to offer people as an opportunity. So if we're seeing the opportunities for people to migrate legally, remain in the United States legally, decrease, automatically we're going to see fewer people in the U.S. without status. But another piece of this is that our economy, sadly, is anchored by undercompensated labor. And that includes people who are new arrivals and people who are undocumented. And we've seen that with the Trump administration sort of rolling back enforcement at farms and meat processing plants, hotels and restaurants. I mean, the reality is without immigrant labor, this country will starve. And we've seen sort of that, observation, that recognition. But it's also really unfortunate because I think folks think about the importance of immigrant labor, but these are people. They're human beings who have, who also need to go to the hospital, who need to take their children to school, who need to make them, take advantage of the court system and get legal relief there. And if they don't feel safe in those places, we're really depriving people of the opportunities and also exploiting them for their labor alone.
Sabrina Balgamwala, she's the director of the Asylum and Immigration Law Clinic at Wayne State University. Professor, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you.
Coming up, did the big three auto companies prevent regional public transit from thriving in Detroit? We'll have the answer next. Stay with us. This is the Metro on WDET.